Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone from wherever you're joining us. And welcome to today's webinar titled Beyond the Familial, the Development of Emotional Communication with Mothers, Fathers, and Strangers. This webinar features Eliala Salvadori, a PhD researcher from the University of Amsterdam, and Dr. Jason Rogers, a senior research scientist at Noldis. Today, Eliala will discuss her research involving infant emotional communication patterns, and Jason will give a quick overview of some coded behaviors. I wanted to take this moment to thank the sponsor for this event, Noldis, for making it all possible. So, everyone, welcome to the floor. Eliala, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you all for being here today in so many. I'm speaking from the Netherlands, which has been my base and home for the last 10 years now. After graduating from my bachelor in Italy, I moved to Amsterdam to get my research master's and my PhD. And I'm super excited to present you today one of the chapters of my PhD dissertation, which is published also open access in the Infancy Journal since last April. Thank you. So, preverbal social interactions rely on dynamic, multimodal emotional communication, which refers to the infant temporal coordination of gaze direction, facial expressions, and vocalizations. Gaze is conceptualized as on or off the partner during dyadic face-to-face interactions. This visual modality is a measure of the infant attention and interest. The facial or affective modality is central to communicating emotional states, which are expressed on a continuum ranging from positive to negative facial expressions. Positive affect is indexed with smiles, while negative affect is indexed with frowns, scowls, and cry faces. Vocalizations are often used to gain the interaction partner's attention and communicate affective engagement. Infant participation in these early social interactions represent the earliest expression of social engagement and affiliation with familiar and also unfamiliar adults. And it's therefore central to the child's emotional, social, and cognitive development. Infant participation, emotional communication develops within early social interactions with parents and becomes progressively more complex throughout the first year of life, as infants increasingly contribute to the social interaction. Prior research has majorly described infant emotional communication with mothers, reporting that by their 4th month of life, infants communicate with their mothers by engaging in cyclical patterns of long visual engagement and positive affect, as well as high vocalization frequency. In the last decades, there has been increasing attention to infant interactions with fathers as well, and we have learned that compared to infant-mother interactions, interaction with fathers are characterized by shorter yet frequent patterns of visual communication as well as by briefer positive affect. Infant vocalization frequency, on the other hand, tends to be similar with mother and fathers. These differences are believed to be rooted in the different interaction style parents engage in with their kids, more soothing in the case of the mother, and more playful and dynamic in the case of father. Now, beyond interacting with their parents, infants often engage in social exchanges with novel and unfamiliar partners, and from infancy onwards, interaction with strangers is a component of social life. When interacting with a stranger, high levels of novelty and uncertainty are involved, such that novel communication patterns tend to emerge. For example, there is agreement among prior studies that infants display higher levels of visual engagement with strangers than with mothers from already 2 months of age. Differential levels of positive affect and vocalizations are not observed before age 4 months, and this is presumably because they reflect the development of expectations relevant to interactions with familiar partners. Yet these findings tend to be scarce and inconclusive, and it was not clear whether infants enhance or temper facial and vocal behavioral patterns of emotional communication as a function of the familiarity of the interaction partner. In addition, although some preliminary findings suggest that infants' interaction with mother act as a template for interaction with strangers, no research had yet examined this while including both mothers and fathers in the study design. It is thus plausible that parents' specific communication patterns, those with mother and father, are two potentially differing templates for infant future social interactions. Another point to mention is that the majority of prior studies comparing strangers and mothers, none of which had also included fathers, are actually based on laboratory observations. While we know that naturalistic studies, which employ observation in familiar and ecologically valid settings like the family's home, are actually critical to eliciting communication patterns that can be generalized to real-life situations. Possibly also, the effects of contextual factors, like the familiarity of the interaction partner, are further moderated by individual disposition, such as the infant temperament. Temperament is a biologically based factor that predisposes personal attentional, emotional, and motor responses to the environment in terms of emotional reactivity and self-regulation. While the emergence of self-regulation begins late in the first year of life, differences in temperamental reactivity are evident as early as 4 months of age and are observable in the infant's positive and negative emotionality, commonly referred to as surgency and negative affectivity. Surgency describes the infant's level of sociability, impulsivity, and eagerness to engage with novel situations in a positive mood of excitement, while negative affectivity refers to irritability, negative mood, and the likelihood to feel distress from limitations, including sadness, anger, and fear of novelty. Prior studies commonly employed maternal and only occasionally paternal reports to measure temperament in the first years of life, and evidence converges in indicating that children with higher level of temperamental surgency are advanced in their communicative development, including triadic joint attention skills, gesture production, and language abilities. Temperamental negative affectivity, on the other hand, tends to be adversely associated with language and dyadic synchrony with parents. Despite its early behavioral manifestations, so far little is known about the role of infant temperament in shaping preverbal communication in the first month of life. This seems important, though, because individual differences in infant temperamental reactivity may interact with contextual factors, such as the familiarity of the partner, shaping the experience of the interaction with a stranger into a positive event for some infants and a distressing one for others. The present study was therefore designed with 3 main goals. The first goal was to examine differences in the development of infant visual, facial, and vocal communication patterns between strangers and each parent. We anticipated that infants would display longer visual engagement with strangers than with either parent, particularly fathers. Conversely, we expected that infants would exhibit briefer positive affect and fewer vocalizations when interacting with strangers than when interacting with mothers, and perhaps fathers as well. Furthermore, we predicted that differences between infant communication with strangers and parents would increase from 4 to 8 months of age, as infants and parents create shared communication patterns. The second goal was to determine how individual differences in the development of infant communication with strangers versus mothers and fathers are modulated by the infant's level of temperamental reactivity. And we anticipated that communication patterns would be generally primed by temperamental surgency and tempered by negative affectivity, And we also expected that these levels of temperamental reactivity would modulate the differences in the communication between interaction partners. Our third goal was to examine the concurrent and longitudinal associations between infant communication with strangers and each parent. We anticipated that the infants would adopt communication patterns developed with familiar partners, hence the mother and the father, as interaction templates for interaction with strangers. Specifically, since maternal interaction styles are characterized by nurturing, soothing, and protective behaviors, while paternal interactional styles tend to be more dynamic, playful, and physically stimulating, we predicted that the infant communication with strangers would be generalized to a greater extent from interaction with fathers. The sample of this study consisted of 58 children and their parents, who were part of a cohort of families involved in a longitudinal study on social communicative development over the first year of life called My Best, which combined home and laboratory testing as well as parental reports. Participants were recruited in the city of Amsterdam and surrounding areas via child care centers such as kindergartens, therapists, educators, babysitters, pregnancy courses. Now, who has experience with recruitment of young infants may know, finding families willing to participate in long-term projects is always quite challenging. Now, in the photo here, you can see an example of a day of baby and family hunting at the park with cookies, flyers, and t-shirts, and this was a successful attempt, likely. Parents in our cohort were predominantly Dutch, highly educated and with a profession that needed a university degree. All fathers work at the time of the data collection, the majority full-time. For mothers, only the 20% work full-time, while the 55% work part-time and the remaining was at home most of the time. We compensated family with a €10 voucher at each home visit, and at the end of the larger longitudinal study with a USB containing all the video recordings of the visit collected over the years. We adopted a longitudinal mixed method design in which each infant was tested at 4 and 8 months of age, within a range of more or less 2 weeks from the child's target ages. To capture day-to-day interaction patterns as they naturally unfold, infants were observed at the family's home, and the home visit lasted approximately 45 minutes. Naturalistic observations were obtained during 3 separate 2-minute face-to-face interactions with the mother, the father, and the female experimenter, and were video recorded using a high-definition 360 dual-lens Samsung camera, which was mounted in between the infant and the adult to get a split-screen output displaying both interaction partners simultaneously. I will show you now a short video clip of an interaction to give you an idea of the setup. To note that the order of the interaction partners was fully counterbalanced across families within the infant gender. To measure temperament, we employed the Dutch translation of the infant behavioral questionnaire. Both mothers and fathers were requested to fill the questionnaire out at both 4 and 8 months. Positive associations were found between maternal and parental scores at both ages, so we computed average parental measure of each temperamental dimension at both 4 and 8 months. The videos were coded microanalytically second by second, up to an accuracy of 1/25 of a second with observer video analysis software by Noldus. A group of trained master and research master students coded the videos with regards to the visual, facial, and vocal communication behaviors of interest. As you can see from the data visualization example here, we had a coding scheme in which gaze and facial expressions were coded as state events, which means that their duration was measured in seconds, while vocalization were coded as point events, so has a frequency of occurrence. And this is because in infants younger than 6 months, the mean duration of vocalizations is usually less than 1 second. For the statistical analysis, communication behaviors measured as duration were transformed into percentage of time, while behaviors measured as frequency of occurrence were calculated as frequency rate per minute. In order to simultaneously investigate the contextual, developmental, and temperamental effects on infant emotional communication while accounting for the nested nature of the data, we constructed multi-level regression models. 6 were the level 1 observation nested within the infants, as they were repeated across the 3 interaction partners and over the 2 ages. The 4 variables for the infant's temperament, namely negative affectivity and surgency at 4 and 8 months, were included as level 2 time-varying covariates. Separate multi-level regression analyses were conducted for each of the infant communication variable. To note that negative facial expressions rarely occurred, both with familiar and unfamiliar partners, and were thus not modeled in the analysis. This resulted in 3 final models, 1 for gaze, 1 for smile, and 1 for vocalizations. So let's get started with the results. Overall, infant levels of partner-directed gaze were lower during interaction with fathers, you can see the blue line in the figure, than with strangers, marked with a green line, while no significant differences were found between mothers and strangers. Infant partner-directed gaze decreased between 4 and 8 months, and this main age effect was more pronounced with fathers than with strangers, an age by partner interaction effect. With respect to temperament, negative affectivity was associated with lower levels of gaze regardless of the identity of the interaction partner. So while there was this main effect of temperamental negative affectivity, interactions between negative affectivity and partner were not significant. Surgency was not found to be associated with infant levels of gaze. Levels of smiling were higher during interaction with mothers than with strangers, while there were no differences in infant positive affect between interaction with fathers and strangers. As with gaze, there was an inverse effect of temperamental negative affectivity on smiling, indicating that infants who had higher levels of negative affectivity had lower levels of smiling. In addition, surgency was associated with higher levels of smiling, and an effect that was more pronounced with mothers than with strangers. This interaction effect can also be seen in the figure. Infants produced more vocalizations with mothers than with strangers at both 4 and 8 months. Vocalization frequency with fathers significantly differed from that with strangers at 8 months, an age by partner interaction effect. As with smiling, there was a main positive effect of temperamental surgency, indicating that infants who had higher levels of surgency also had higher vocalization frequency, regardless of the identity of the interaction partner. So interaction effects between surgency and partner were not significant. Temperamental negative affectivity was not associated with infant vocalization frequency. Finally, we examined the similarities between infant communication with a stranger and each parent. We did this by analyzing the covariance matrix of the final multi-level models. By interpreting these random effects via their standardized coefficients, we examined the extent to which infant behavioral patterns of emotional communication with strangers were associated with communication patterns with mothers and fathers, while controlling for individual levels of temperamental surgency and negative affectivity. So a sort of partial correlations. And this figure graphically represents the significant and positive associations between infant communication patterns with a stranger and infant communication with mother on the left side of the triangle, and between infant communication patterns with a stranger and communication with father on the right side of the triangle. We examined both concurrent and longitudinal associations. Solid and dashed lines represent concurrent associations at 4 and 8 months, respectively, while arrow lines represent longitudinal or developmental associations from 4 to 8 months. Accordingly, results suggest that at 4 months, infants' interaction with strangers and mothers had in common an emotional type of communication characterized by similar levels of positive affect, meaning that those infants who smiled longer at mothers were also those infants who smiled longer at a stranger. Interaction with stranger and fathers, on the other hand, shared a more attentional communication characterized by similar levels of visual and vocal communication behaviors. At 8 months, infants interacted with the strangers by exhibiting positive affect that was associated with and parallel to those of infant communication patterns with both mothers and fathers. Higher vocalization frequency with mothers and fathers at 4 months was associated with infant vocalization frequency with stranger at 8 months. So this was a longitudinal or developmental association. Therefore, putting these findings together and linking them back to our original goals and hypotheses, results indicate that mean levels of visual, facial, and vocal communication differed by partner. Infants gazed longer at strangers than at fathers, probably because paternal interactive styles are characterized by active physical play, and exhibited less smiling to strangers than to mothers, probably because, being the mother the first caregiver and the parent who spent the more time in the household, infants experience greater levels of repeated interaction with their mother, practicing affective sharing and positive arousal, which is indeed characterize infant-mother interactions. And infants produce fewer vocalization with strangers than with either parent, which suggests that infant vocal communication levels might be a characteristic feature of the familiar, intimate bonds infants share with their parents. While differences with mothers were evident at both ages, differences with fathers were moderated by infant age, and, as anticipated, tended to increase over the first year of life, as infants get more familiarized and bonded with the paternal figure. Namely, infant visual engagement with strangers had a less pronounced decrease than visual engagement with fathers between 4 and 8 months. Infant vocal communication with fathers increased with age, becoming significantly different from vocal communication with strangers at 8 months. So we can conclude that typical of infant-stranger interaction seem to be the high levels of visual engagement as well as the low levels of positive affect and vocalizations. With regard to our second research question and the role of temperament, we found that temperament was associated to each communication modality, both as a main effect and in interaction with the partner identity. As we had indeed hypothesized, temperamental surgency was associated with higher levels of positive affect and vocalizations with strangers and both parents. Positive affect was particularly accentuated with mothers, while temperamental negative affectivity was associated with lower levels of visual engagement and positive affect. So, the current findings contribute to our understanding of the complex interplay of individual and contextual factors on the infant expression of positive emotions, suggesting that temperament modulates infant partner-specific levels of positive affect already in the first half year of life. Last, our study presents the first empirical results relating to infant generalization of communication patterns from interactions with mothers and fathers to interactions with strangers, where generalization is conceptualized as similar behaviors toward discriminable entities. Results, in fact, indicate that infant levels of visual engagement, positive affect, and vocalization with strangers were congruent with communication behaviors with both parents in and over time. Together, results not only corroborate the idea that infant communication with novel partners reflects communication patterns developed with parents, but also advance our current understanding of how infant interaction with mothers and fathers do constitute distinctive templates for the infant's future interaction. Therefore, taken together, our findings complement prior research on the development of infant communication with familiar partners and provide new insights into interactions with fathers and the role of temperament in early social interactions. Despite its innovations, this study naturally faces also some limitations. To begin with, the fact that participants in the current study mostly consisted of highly educated middle-class Dutch families limits the generalizability of the findings. For instance, paternal involvement in caregiving is usually increased in families of middle and high socioeconomical status. Therefore, future studies should test across more heterogeneous backgrounds, ideally including comparisons between different cultural identities that rely on distinct social rules concerning emotional expressions, such as individualistic versus community cultures. A second limitation of this study concerns its moderated sample size, which nonetheless yielded abundant information through the infant's numerous repeated observations across social contexts of interactions and over time. In this regard, it is also worth noting that human manual microanalytic coding is undoubtedly a highly intensive and time-consuming procedure. Just imagine that for a 2 minutes of video, the coding of only one partner with the 3 communication modalities of gaze, facial expression, and vocalization takes up to 1 hour and a half. So around 3 hours per video for completing the coding of both interaction partners. Now, considering that we had approximately 300 videos, as the same kid was observed with 3 partners at 2 ages, and considering also that we ensure reliability and double coding prior to the coding, this leads to ways beyond 1,000 hours of coding. Therefore, while on the one hand our study emphasizes the power of microanalysis in young infants, providing once again how relatively small amounts of nonverbal communication may generate high-density multimodal data that carry robust information, it also points out the urge and importance of developing automatic coding systems suitable for a few months old infants. A third point of reflection concerns the fact that we examine the development of infant emotional communication from 4 to 8 months of age. While this does represent a significant step forward in the understanding of infant interaction with familiar and non-familiar interaction partners across the first and second half year of life, additional time points would have had the potential to identify not linear, so quadratic or cubic developmental trajectories. Moreover, it would be interesting if future research could investigate the extent to which infant partner-specific communication patterns contribute to shaping the child's later socio-emotional development. With this regard, I would like to briefly introduce you, as we still have some time left, to some of the following up projects that generated from this one I just presented to you, and on which I'm currently working on. In one of these studies, we aim to explore the data on the behavioral patterns of emotional communication with mother, father, and strangers in relation to measures of pointing gesture, a referential communication behavior which develops by the end of the first year of life and that is central to a healthy social, cognitive, and linguistic development. Pointing gesture is defined as the simultaneous extension of the arm and the index finger toward a third identity, and we measure it at 12 and 15 months via standardized task in the laboratory, for which I have a very short, cute clip to show you. Basically, the experimenter and the baby were interacting in front of one another, as you can see in the picture below, When behind the experimenter, there will appear stimuli that have either a positive, negative, or neutral emotional balance. And the experimenter will keep interacting, pretending nothing is going on behind her back, so to elicit the child's gestural communication.
Hey, waar kijk je naar? Oh, mooi. Ja, wauw. Ik zie het ook. Ja, echt mooi.
So yes, the preliminary results from this study indicated that early emotional communication behaviors at 4 and 8 months do predict rates of pointing gesture production at 12 and 15 months. And each of the visual, facial, and vocal communication modality does. But they do so in different way for each of the interaction partners. Interestingly also, temperament modulated these associations between emotional communication and pointing gesture, strengthening the association for those kids with higher levels of temperamental urgency and lower levels of negative affectivity. In another project carried out in collaboration with Alan Cobo-Lewis from the University of Maine, we're developing a multi-level Poisson survival regression approach for high-density multimodal data to predict the rates of infant coordination of gaze and smile behaviors in real time. I won't go too much into the specifics of the graph interpretation here, just because of time constraints, but I can already share with you results displayed in the middle panel regarding the smiling behaviors, for example, which indicate that infant rates of transition from a state of no smile, so 0, to a state of smile, 1, so infant initiation of a smile, are greater when contingent to gazing at the partner face with the blue line, while the rates of transition from a state of smile to a state of no smile, hence of smile termination, are greater when gazing away from the partner. And this effect is seen present at both ages and across familiar and unfamiliar partners. Another project based on the data I presented to you today and led by Martina Zaharieva, also from the University of Amsterdam and in collaboration with Noldo's information technology, concerns the validation of automated facial expressions analysis for young infants. As mentioned earlier, manual coding of behavior is quite laborious and intensive, and because of this, it poses limitations to replicability. Up to date, Babyface Reader by Noldus is one of the few commercially available solutions that has been successfully applied to automatically classify facial expression in infants between 6 and 24 months of age, showing comparable results to manual coding techniques. As we know, however, some target behaviors of interest are observable already much earlier than 6 months, as infants' interest in face-to-face interactions with caregivers peaks already at 4 months of age. And this is why it's important to validate such instruments with younger babies. From the Babyface Reader, we obtain similar output as that from the manual coding, in terms of valence of emotion, so has positive, negative, neutral, or not codable. And we can also obtain the intensity of various action units that get activated during positive and negative facial expressions. Here is a little demo using the Babyface Reader with the action units integrated with the manual coding scheme in the observer. Action unit 12, that is in the third row, is the one that identifies smiling behavior. Now, as you can see, it has greater activation, this action unit 12, in this episode for which the manual coder had also identified positive facial expressions, marked in orange. Main results that we found in this project, in short, indicated that manual coding yields a higher percentage of available data than the automated measurement, 99% compared to 85%, possibly because manual coders have also access to additional background and contextual information. Second main finding is that employing individual action units to predict positive and negative manually coded facial expression yields to more accurate classification rates than employing Babyface Reader Global Emotional Valence Formula or a priori formula involving more complex action unit configurations, such that the action unit 12 measuring smiling behaviors reliably discriminated positive from negative or neutral facial expressions, and action units 3 and 4 identifying brow lowering reliably distinguished negative from neutral facial expressions. So overall, these results provide initial support for applying Babyface Reader to automatically detect smile configurations and crying faces as an index of positive and negative affect in young infants. Babies learn to control their nonverbal behavior ways before they develop speech, and these nonverbal behaviors offer unique opportunities for scientists from many disciplines such as psychology, biology, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence to answer questions about how and why we develop social communication skills as adults and as a species. Once the automatic techniques becomes more fully developed and show to perform reliably, this technology can serve as a diagnostic tool in many pediatric contexts to help the early detection of facial muscle abnormalities as well as early signs of emotional communication difficulties that are typical of several neurodevelopmental conditions, such as, among others, autism spectrum disorders. Now, last but not least, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I would like to thank all my collaborators, especially my supervisors, Cristina Colonnesi and Franz Ort from the University of Amsterdam, Departments of Developmental Psychopathology and Methods and Statistics, respectively, of the Institute of Research in Child Development and Education, and Daniel Messenger from the University of Miami, Departments of Psychology, Pediatrics, and Music and Electrical and Computer Engineering, as well as our research assistant Stephanie Misrai and several master students who throughout the years helped me out with the data collection and the intensive manual coding. If you would like, you can follow up on the progresses of my research on LinkedIn, Twitter, and ResearchGate. So yeah, let's connect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eliala. That was fantastic. Really, really great presentation. Hi, Jason. Thanks so much for joining us today. And you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks again, Sarah and Eliala. Wonderful, really, really wonderful presentation. So thank you so much for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so telling you about lag sequential analysis or conditional probability. And for some of you wondering the title, I live in the middle of the United States in a part of the country called the Midwest. And we have a very particular vernacular when it comes to being nice. And we don't say simply things like yes or no. That's far too easy for the way that we operate here in the Midwest. And so we use things like no, yeah, which means yes, or yeah, no, which means no, or yeah, no, yeah, which means yeah, probably yes, or yeah, no, for sure, which means definitely. So we don't just simply use these simple communication tools. That's far too easy for us here in the Shire. So the point of that is that the combination and the use of the words are dependent upon what's first and what's second. So what is the precedent, what is the antecedent, how does that all work? And that's basically what I mean by a lag sequential analysis and a conditional probability. So, okay, you don't care who I am, Jason. Nice to meet you. Okay, so a lag sequential is basically the frequency of transitions between pairs of certain events or within a certain time lag. And you can see the initial definition of it and from some statistical methods behind it. And what's really great about this, and what I absolutely love about the observer, is this will calculate automatically within the observer. It's probably the coolest feature, I think, within the observer platform. So you can look at things like interested in sitting, what preceded the sit, what followed the sit. If you look at it from a time lag, you can say, okay, mom smiles at baby. How often does baby return that smile to mom? Within 5 seconds. So you can ask some really cool research questions. So you can look at it things like this. So you have what's called the criteria. Here you can see in the red bar, these are the criteria, and then there are the targets. Right. So you can look at them in a time lag. So at the bottom, you can say, okay, given the criteria, what happened in a certain amount of time after that? Or you can look at A to B or B to A relationships. You can look at A to C, A all the way in 9 behaviors in either direction. So you can create these really, really interesting behavioral chains through your coded data. Now, one last little bit, and then I'll actually show you some data, which is the whole point of all of this, is the observer also gives you really two cool features called XO and YO, which took me several years to really actually understand this until I actually had some data that began to make some sense. So you get XO, which is where there's basically a B but no A. So you can think about that. So you have something, but there's nothing preceding that. And then likewise with the YO, you have something but nothing following it. So if you think about the way that behaviors are coded and the way that the chains of behaviors exist, if you have an XO, that generally indicates your first behavior. So that's the first part of the chain. Likewise, the YO, where you have an A, but nothing following it, there's your end. So the XO and the YO provide a nice bookend to your behavioral chain. So then you can look at the relationship among them. So you can see where it starts, how it transitions throughout their behavioral chain, and then how it ends. And as I mentioned, in the observer, it's really fantastic because you can look at A to B, or you can look at B to A. So you can say, we've coded an aggression behavior, what directly preceded that? Or you can say, like I said, mom smiles at baby, does baby return that smile? So I want to take a couple of minutes and I want to show you some actual example of some actual data. So this is data done from a project many, many years ago where we were coding women washing their face. And so you can see the behaviors around the eyes, around the mouth, the brow, the cheeks, the eyes, forehead, jaws, lips, neck, nose, and upper eyelids. And so what we did is we coded whenever they touch that individual part of their face. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that these are women behaviors in their home, in front of their own mirrors, in 4 different cities in 2 continents, both in Asia and in the United States. And so you can see the XO at the bottom, you can see the YO on the right side, the right column, and XO, the bottom row. So if we start along that, right, and actually if I'm just going to do it quickly and then I'll remove so we're going to start here, right? And if we do that, we look across and we see, okay, so the cheeks 14 and the forehead 48. Okay, so that's interesting. So we're going to start there. And so I want you to follow along if you're going, right? So you got some, you're washing your face, you got some soap on your hands. Where do you start, right? Nobody starts here. You start here or here, right? So sometimes they go to the cheeks, but a majority of the time they're starting here at the forehead, right? I mean, all of you women have a little less forehead than I have. So you actually have hair, but that's okay. So we start here at the forehead. Well, where do we move from there? So if we started with the XO and then we found the forehead, the next place we're going to move is look at the forehead. So again, I'm going to go back to my drawing, and this is the last time I promise, so you don't have to see my crappy drawings. But so then we're going to start with the forehead and work our way over. And what we see when we do that is then we go from the forehead to the cheeks. So that's interesting. Either we start at the cheeks or we go from the forehead to the cheeks. Okay, that makes some sense. So where do we go next, right? So if you're at the cheeks, where do we go next? Well, if you look at the graph, next, then we go to the nose. Well, that makes sense. So we go here, then we're here, or we're here, then we're here. Okay. So where next from the nose? Where do you think, right? So if you think about it, following along, well, next, we're going to go around the jaw. And that's exactly what you see, going around the jaw. So now we're down here, to which then we go to the lips. So we're kind of doing the sweeping motion. Now we're here at the lips. And then we're going to go from the lips around the mouth, right? That all makes perfect sense. And then from around the mouth, we're going to go around the eyes, right? So our eyes are still open. We're still here. And then we directly into the eyes. And then I'll just work your way through the process. And then finally, we finish here at the brow. So we start here or we start here. We come down the jaw. We go up this way. We go around the eyes, close our eyes, and we finish up here at the brow. And what you see then is this pattern of behavior from the coded data, irrespective of the cleaning device, irrespective of the city. Everyone washes their face this way. But what's really interesting about this is then you use that coded behavior. This is across, I believe, if I'm doing the math right, about 55,000 observations over the course of a month over 4 cities. Distilled and boiled down, but yeah. What's really cool about this lag sequential analysis is it's not just looking at when do you clean your face and what type of device. Of course, Observer gives you all of that. Of course, you've got all of that. But what the lag sequential analysis allows you to do is look at those behavioral chains, as I said. So we can say, where does it start? What is it happening? What is the chain? What is the sequence of events that we go through? And then how does it end? And now we've got this really brilliant pattern by which we can describe the cleaning process in this example. So great, with that, look at that, 9 minutes. So we are perfectly timed for questions. So basically, a lag sequential analysis looks for a relationship among coded behaviors. It can be negative, positive. You can look at things all the way around. And as I said, it is probably the coolest feature that Observer has. And it has a lot of really cool features from the integration, synchronization of data, from coding to reliability analysis. But I think the lag sequential analysis is by far and away the most exciting and the most fun thing. So if you have questions about it, or if you'd like to share some lag sequential, because you can see I get pretty excited about this kind of stuff, please contact us and we'd be happy to chat about it. And while I'm here, I'd like to take the time to say thank you again to Inside Scientific for having us, and thank you to our wonderful featured speaker for such an amazing presentation.
All right, so the first question that we have here is, why do you, so this is for you, Eliala. Why do you think you found no differences in infant levels of smiling behavior between strangers and fathers?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. The fact that infant smiling levels between father and strangers did not differ significantly between one another is actually quite intriguing. We didn't know what to expect, but interaction with fathers and with strangers tend to involve high levels of stimulation, which is an active physical and play stimulation in the case of the father, and the novelty stimulation in the case of the stranger, which might have yielded to similar levels of infant positive emotional expressions. Future direction should definitely compare also the intensity and the temporal dynamics of positive affect with strangers and with fathers to see whether we might actually spot some differences indeed in the intensity of the positive affect. And I think it's also interesting and relatedly to this, the fact that we found also in the triangle figure, there were more similarities between the stranger and the fathers than with the stranger and the mother. And this might be because during the interaction with fathers, infants get challenged to new explorations and understandings, learning how to stay focused and alert, yet to take the risk. And in this activation relationship with their father, infants get stimulated to explore the world and overcome obstacles, learning how to deal with unfamiliar situations, such as encountering a stranger. So following this line of reasoning, fathers likely represent an intermediary person who is in between the familiar and safe mother on the one hand and the novel and potentially unsafe stranger on the other one, so whose function is opening the child to the outside world.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We have a question here for you, Jason. Jason gave the face washing example, but what are some other behaviors that might work well with this type of analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's another thing that's really interesting within the Observer platform is you can restrict behavior. So you don't have to look at every single coded behavior. So you can look at them to a direct one-to-one relationship. So I'll give you another couple of examples. I mentioned a little bit, but one of the ones that's really used in autism research is responses of parents and the child, right? So the mom and the baby are interacting, much like the presentation that Eliala gave. And you can look at the responses from the baby to the mother and back and forth. Another thing that's in published literature, which actually is what really started me on looking at the lag sequential, is from the research of Ian Paul at the University of Mississippi. And he looks at rodent sexual development in mothers who were given antidepressants. And so the rodent sexual courting cycle is very specific and very regimented. The female does a lordosis response, and then the male either accepts or does not. And so you could use that lag sequential analysis to say, look, all the females are presenting a lordosis response, but in groups A versus B or C, you see a different response to that. So it's really, really fascinating.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, we've got another question here. This is for you, Eliala. This question is, are there differences in stranger gender? So do infant reactions to female strangers more closely approximate mother responses?
Right, very good question. Thank you actually to bring this up, so to have the opportunity to go more in depth in this aspect. The stranger was always a female experimenter, so we didn't have a counterbalance male experimenter, which is also a potential limitation of the study, and is something that would be amazing to be replicated in future studies with actually like also male experimenter. There were no differences in infant gender, but yeah, regarding to the question, we didn't have a male experimenter.
Okay, fantastic. There's another question here for you, Eliala. This question is, with the pointing experiment that you're working on now as a next step, you mentioned that there were a few different types of stimuli that appeared behind the interacting partner, and some of them elicited positive and negative connotations. Can you explain what the difference between a positive stimuli and a negative stimuli?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for the question. In the original procedure developed by Camaglioni et al. Of this standardized task to measure pointing gesture, it's expected the puppet to come out of the courtenay. And this is what we would refer to as a positively balanced stimuli, something that is pleasant or attractive. In our experiment, we decided to extend the original paradigm by introducing also neutrally or negative stimuli. And for negative stimuli, we would refer to something that might likely trigger negative feelings and negative emotions. And this is something that was quite hard to find for a baby, because we could think of sounds that could be scary, but we couldn't have sounds in this specific procedure because the experimenter was supposed not to know that something was going on behind his back. So we turned into evolutionary psychology stimuli that are often considered as evolutionary negative, which is namely the snake or a spider.
Okay.
And for neutral ones was something that we expected not to have a specific triggering of specific emotion, and would be like a kitchen cloth or something that the kid might be accustomed and familiar with in his daily life, but not necessarily attracted to in a specific way. And for the positive one, in our study, we used this spiral with a ball inside that creates an optical effect. And our aim was to try to elicit the wow effect, the attraction.
Okay, cool. Yeah, a snake or a spider would scare me, so I get it.
Didn't scare that much the babies, though, unfortunately.
Perhaps a learned bias as you grow up. Okay, Eliala, we have another question here for you. From your experience, is there any correlation between facial expressions and arm movements at 4 months and 8 months?
Very nice questions. Not that I noticed or that I have on the top of my mind. It's not something I researched about myself. Very interesting. I will pay attention to this now, rewatching some of the videos, but no, not that I know of.
Okay, awesome. Well, based on the time, I think that's going to be our last question for today, but I really wanted to thank you both for your time and your expertise. It really was a pleasure to have you with us, and I hope that you had fun.
Thank you for organizing this amazing event, Sarah, and thank you, Jason, for being part of it.
Thank you.